Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie, and today I'm here with Rachael Salter and Aimee Brown, who are both consultants with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk DP. So just before we start, I want to say a quick thank you, as this marks our 100th episode of the InfoSec Insider podcast. So thank you so much to all of our listeners for tuning in every week and for all of your support. We really, really appreciate it. So today we're going to be looking at the first 72 hours of a data breach and managing data breaches without making things worse in that sort of immediate aftermath. So my first question for you guys is, what actually counts as a personal data breach and when does it need to be reported to the ICO?
Good question.
One that's quite often gotten wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And those first few hours are critical, really, as to what you do or don't do at that point. I think one of the things Aimee and I probably come across the most is what actually is a breach, because that's the biggest thing here. It's all right saying, what should we be doing when we've encountered a breach? But 9 times out of 10, I think a lot of my clients aren't really sure what a data breach really is. And so they can send a few hairs off racing, can't they, Aimee, in panic around what they think is wrong at that point. When I say to clients, have you had any data breaches? If I'm doing a gap analysis and ask them the questions around data breaches, they say, no, we've never been hacked. We've never had a phishing attack. And they assume that a data breach is only when someone has accessed their systems, got in and taken something. I think because that's the common misconception you see on the news, you see in the movies, cyber attacks, stealing information, and everyone believes that's what a data breach is and doesn't see anything past that. And a data breach is so much more, isn't it, Aimee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data breaches can be anything from the wrong email going to the wrong person, to somebody gossiping about personal data about somebody else in the canteen, all the way through to a full-on hack where they've actually, a threat actor has actually accessed your systems and has started to take control of it. The range is huge. Yeah. About what a breach can be, and it's not, I think the terminology is what causes the confusion. If you break it down, you've got a security incident, you've got data breaches, and you've got a breach of GDPR, which they're 3 different things, but one incident can have all 3 of those breaches, whereas one incident could just be one of them. So a phishing email which is blocked, for example, is just a security incident, whereas an organization that's keeping data, personal data, for 50 years when it doesn't need to and doesn't have a good retention policy is a GDPR breach. So you've got those different aspects within the different incidences as well, which I don't think people really understand very well.
And that's what I'm saying. I think it's really important to define quite quickly, is it a data breach? So the legislation basically says that a data breach is where someone accesses information they're not entitled to have. It's really that simple. And that could be, like Aimee says, that you could have poor quality data on your systems, which will be a breach of principle 4, the accuracy principle. People think that a breach is the loss of something potentially, rather than just the mismanagement of it. And it can be so much more. Often as well, a reoccurring one that we get quite a bit is, for example, where information is held on a system longer than it needs to be kept, unauthorized access from somebody. Could it be that someone's accessed something they're not entitled to have? Aimee just mentioned around, an email going to the wrong person. That could even be internal. That doesn't have to be external, does it, Aimee? It doesn't have to be that you've sent an email to the wrong client, for example, or the wrong individual. It could be that I accidentally sent Aimee an email internally and it's got information on it about someone else in the organization that Aimee's not entitled to see. That's a data breach. So you've got to work that out. And you've got simple situations as well that happen regularly where somebody loses a laptop. How often does a laptop get left on the train, on a bus, in a cafe? That happens quite a bit. Now, is that a security incident or a data breach? Well, that will depend on what's happening with that laptop at the time. So is the laptop encrypted? Has any data been accessed? Or is it just that the laptop is missing? Because if the laptop is missing and data can't be accessed, then it's just a security incident, and you'll let IT know, they'll disable the laptop and we start again. However, if the laptop's missing and someone's access data, let's say it's unlocked when somebody opens it, and they can access your systems, then you've suddenly got yourself data that's been breached, potentially personal data that's been breached about someone, and someone's got access that they shouldn't have. So you've got yourself a security incident and a data breach. So I think really that first 72 hours is critical, because you've got to identify what's actually really going on. That's the most important part, because how you deal with it in that first few hours is key to what you know about it. And that's the hardest thing, I think, isn't it, Aimee? Trying to get information out of people. Well, what has actually happened? Because most data breaches happen at 4:30 on a Friday, right? And then you get a telephone call in blind panic. There's been a data breach. We've sent a payroll extract to a complete stranger by email, and all panic's breaking loose. Well, we need to work out, what have we done? We may have sent an attachment out, but is it locked down? Is it password protected? How easily accessible is it? Because actually, if the information isn't in someone else's hands, then yes, we might have sent an email with an attachment to the wrong person. But if they can't access the information, is it truly a breach? But I think when these things happen, people get a little bit scared, a little bit worried. They're thinking, oh, we're in trouble, there's a fine, the ICO, I'm going to be in trouble at work, I've made a mistake. It's not about finger pointing, it's about establishing really quickly what's really happened, what information has truly been lost at that point. And that's the most important thing, isn't it, Aimee? It's the hardest thing to get out of a client.
Yeah, and I think also that then leads on to, well, is it reportable? So another one is a misconception is, what is reportable to the ICO within your 72-hour deadline? And because they're not understanding what is breached, what the actual incident is, and what the level of breach is, because the reaction times are slow, that then causes you to potentially miss your deadline, or also not really have the time to understand the true risk to the rights and freedoms of the individuals involved when it comes to the personal data, so that you can understand whether it is reportable or not to the ICO.
And there's a lot of overreaction as well, isn't there, Aimee? We have clients who say, well, this has happened and we've reported to the ICO, and I'm like, why? Why have you done that? Why don't we just stop for a second, take a breath, let's look at what we've got? Because when you're reporting a breach to the ICO, you have to know a lot of information to fill in that self-referral form, don't you? You have to be able to tell them, Aimee, how many data subjects are involved, what types of data is involved, what happened. Well, often that first 24 hours you haven't got a clue what happened, because you're trying to find that out from numerous other people. Often the data protection officer is contacting us and saying, well, I've asked everyone and no one's really sure what's happened, no one's sure where it's gone. Well, why are we reporting that just right now? Because ultimately, until we know what's happened, we don't actually know if there's even been a data breach. So you may have set the ICO off on a trail of something that hasn't actually happened, doesn't actually need to be reported. And the other thing as well, at the beginning of the GDPR back in 2018, I remember very clearly the previous commissioner putting out a statement that all data breaches needed to be reported. Well, it didn't take very long for them to renege on that and say, actually, let's take a risk-based approach on this, because what we don't care about is where you've accidentally sent an email, where I've sent an email to Aimee, for example, with something in it that's so low level and so low risk. Okay, I shouldn't have sent it, but actually, what's the impact? The ICO doesn't care about that. They want the big stuff, the risky stuff, the important stuff, the juicy stuff, where a special category data has been shared outside of the business. They want to see where social care records fallen into the wrong hands, or where a police record's been shared with the wrong prisoner, or whatever it might be. They're looking at risk-based approaches. So, there's a lot of over-referral, isn't there, Aimee, still to the ICO on data breaches? Yeah,
again, because and I think it all comes down to people don't understand or don't look at the risk of the rights and freedoms. They overreact. So, is this going to cause someone financial loss? Is it going to cause them to become a victim of fraud or theft? Is it going to cause them extreme distress, embarrassment, discrimination? Is it going to affect their housing situation or their physical safety? Whereas they just go, oh, we've released their name and their phone number, we need to report it. What's the real risk to that? That phone number is already on Google under that business name if you search it, or they overreact, as you say, and panic and report stuff they don't need to report, because they don't really know and understand the rights and freedoms that are affected.
And we still get a number of clients as well that report, and when they're looking at risk and they talk about risk-based, making a risk-based decision on whether to self-refer or not, they're looking at the risk to their business, and it's not about that. The ICO does not care that you have potentially lost some commercially sensitive information because you've shared it with the wrong person. They don't care about that. What they care about is the risk to the individual whose information it is. And that's still a massive common misconception 8 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't, will it look bad for us is not the right question to ask.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what you get, isn't it? When they're panicking, we're in trouble, we're going to lose clients, this is going to be reputationally damaging for us. No one cares about that. The privacy risk is around what happens to the individual whose information it is. That's all the ICO cares about.
So how do organisations assess risk and decide whether affected individuals need to be told?
That's a case-by-case basis. And it's hard, isn't it, Aimee?
It's a really hard one. I mean, even with the experience that we've both got, you have to question yourself, don't you? You have to really stop and think and really delve deep into it as to understand what the risk can be.
You know, I lead the CDP training course for data protection, and one of the key things I always ask is, I say to people when we're talking about risk and we're talking about the loss of data and we're talking about breaches in the training course, I say to people, if I lost a HR record that just says someone's name, someone's job role and their net salary of 1,000 people, but then I lost one social care record for maybe a child who's in the care system with all their health data and all of their personal background, and there's a reason why they're in the care system. Does one record outweigh 1,000 HR records? What does that risk look like? You know, and what is the risk to that child if that information is lost because they may be in a care situation, because they may be taken away from their parents? Their parents may not know where they are, so there's a risk there. What happens? What's the risk to 1,000 people whose names and job titles are missing? You know, what does that risk look like? Because people automatically think 1,000 records, oh, that's huge, that's a massive quantity, that's, you know, that's a real problem because 1,000 people are affected. Is that a higher risk than one record that's really important to a child and maybe their upbringing and welfare and health and well-being? So
and safeguarding.
Exactly. You know, and we deal with a lot of that, because we deal with a lot of social housing, we deal with a lot of court orders and things like that, where we're talking around the protections of individuals and children who are in the care system. We get a lot of that. We deal with a lot of historical child sex abuse. There's a lot of records there. It could be one record relating to one person compared to 10,000 records. You know, and I think automatically a human's gut feeling is, well, that's a lot of people, that's a lot of records. So risk isn't around the number, the quantity, it's around the information and around the risk, like Aimee says, the risk to the individual whose information it is. And you always have to think worst case scenario around this. You know, I mean, from my background, work coming from a policing background, for example, the loss of someone's very basic information could cost someone their life. That's the seriousness of that. Whereas in everyday the office, if I was sending an email today and I accidentally disclosed some information about someone, is it likely to cost them their life? Probably not. They're probably not going to be very happy with me because I've shared maybe someone's salary or maybe someone's sickness record with somebody, but no one's going to die off the back of that. So, you know, risk is hard to quantify. It's something you have to do internally. It's something you have to look at as a business. You have to look at what the impact is on the individual. And that's a case-by-case basis. There's no blanket approaches there, Aimee. You can't just say, well, actually, that record's been breached, so this is what we must do. You know, this is a high risk because you have to look at the individual situation and scenario and work it out from there.
And I also think something that is not looked at properly as well is it's not just about what's gone wrong, so what data has been compromised or breached and the risk to the individual, but what happens next. So if you've got things in place to mitigate that risk, for example, the spreadsheet that went out was password protected, or you have got the ability to shut it down, or you can quarantine things, or if you've got steps in place that once that incident is reported, you can push a button and things start to happen, then you're mitigating risk and you're bringing the risk levels down. And I also don't think that's always taken into consideration. Again, they react instantly in panic and report things and put things into place that way, whereas they can actually go, oh, actually, we can breathe because we've got this and this in place that can reduce that risk massively for the individual.
Yeah, and I mean, how many times, Aimee, did we get, you know, I sent an email to the wrong person. Well, did you try and recall the email? I didn't know I could do that, because you could have mitigated that risk, because you could have recalled the email before the recipient read it.
Yeah.
And yes, and then it's a near miss, because, you know, recording breaches is also important, isn't it, Aimee? You know, around what, what should you be recording where, and what's the difference between a breach, a security incident, and a near miss? It nearly happened. So what are we learning from that? That's also really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've dealt with clients, haven't we, where they've gone, you said, okay, so we've got a near miss, but we need to document that. We need to keep a record of what's happened, any decisions that have been made, etc., why you're not reporting it, such like. And they've like, oh, well, how do I do that? Well, you don't have a breach log. You've not got a nice little Excel spreadsheet where you can just put in the details. Oh no, not got one of them. Like, oh, okay. Because you go into that instant, oh, we've had a phishing email. And we need to report that. That's an IT, we need to get involved with that. They must have a breach log. Well, no, they might not do, because that breach might not come from IT. So you also need to incorporate all your different departments in these kind of things, and they all need to know where to go and what to do. Because if it's not logged and there's no documentation for it as well, and the ICO is not going to be pretty impressed when they do come to investigate something that's happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I think breach logs as well, from thinking practically, internally, the breach log is really important for you as an organisation to take organisational learning forward. So, we speak to clients regularly who have a data breach log, and when you actually do some analysis on that, you can look at, 30% of breaches in the business are things that are out of your control. You've got someone, it's an external source tried to attack your systems, and there's only so much you can do about that. That's an IT's domain, information security, and making sure everything's covered off. But then when you've got human error, so you may have individuals in the business who continuously make mistakes, and that causes data breaches. And it's important to record those as human error, so you can look at, well, what's the organisation doing about that? Is this a disciplinary situation? Is it identifying a training need within the business? What do we need to do to reduce that risk of that happening again? How do we learn from that? If you're not logging it, you're not learning. There's no record so that you can learn from that. So that's really important, and we keep a breach register. All of our clients, we make sure they keep a breach register, and they look at that regularly and look at those trends and say, okay, well, this department continuously makes mistakes, so we clearly need to get some training in there, or these people are struggling with maybe understanding what they're doing wrong, and we perhaps need to spend some time with them. And then you can look at, well, actually, this person isn't learning, so maybe we've got ourselves a disciplinary or some sort of performance related issue. It's important, because the business can't move forward if it doesn't understand the trends.
And also, if you're not documenting that and it does go to the ICO and you end up on their radar, and they come along in 12 months' time and go, so you had a breach in January 2025. Can you tell us why you decided not to report that, and what steps were taken? And you've not documented that anywhere, then how are you going to remember? How are you going to know what you've done, what mitigating factors you used, and what decisions were made, and why and when? And you need to keep that documented to be able to answer to the ISO if you need to.
And we work as well very loosely on the 5x5 theory, around the likelihood and the output. What's the likelihood of something going terribly wrong here if this information falls in the wrong hands? If the information is gone and out of our control, what's the likelihood of the impact on somebody else? And it's around looking at what that looks like, and you do those risk assessments internally, and you make a decision as to whether you're self-referring it to the ICO, or whether you're telling the data subjects, because that's another really critical thing. Are we telling these people that we've just lost their HR file? Are we telling these people that we've accidentally shared an email with their work email addresses and phone numbers on? What's the risk? And that's it. You're making those decisions, and this is why you have a DPO, or you have somebody who leads on data protection that's qualified in this area to help make those decisions around risk, and to support you making those decisions. And sometimes there's no real right or wrong decision, is there, Aimee? It's just the decision at the time of what and the key thing about that as well is that you are documenting that decision at that moment in time, because right at that moment in time you decided it was self-referable or it's not, or we're telling the data subject or we're not, and why. And you're saying you're documenting that, so in a year's time, like Aimee says, when somebody says, well, why was the decision not to tell 250 tenants that you lost their tenancy records? Well, we need to say, well, why did we do that? What was the decision we made on the day? So documenting it, because I say there's not always a right or wrong answer at the time. With what that might be the right decision. It might change over time, couldn't it, Aimee? When more unfolds, that can often happen. In a week's time, you suddenly find out, you think, actually, that's really low risk. We're just gonna mark it up on the breach register. We're going to sit on it, and we're going to say, well, okay, but we've dealt with this as best we can. We've mitigated as much risk as we can. We're quite happy. And then in a week, you find out something else has happened. Something else unfolds, and find out more. And that often happens in a breach. It's like a scenario that plays out over time, until you find out the various different things that have happened. And then suddenly you might go, do you know what, the decision not to refer was wrong, so we need to do it now.
I mean, the other thing is it's the balancing act, isn't it? Because you also shouldn't delay notification until you've got every detail, because those details, as you said, could take weeks to come out. And you've only got that 72-hour threshold really with the ICO where you should be considering it. So they don't want you to sit and wait until every single detail's out. Make your decisions within that time frame with the information that you've got available to you, document it, and then if afterwards the decision needs to change because more details come out, you can justify and show your thought process and the process of the journey of the incident.
A lot where there's been sort of a lot of financial breach. So, for example, the big pension breach that happened a couple of years ago, the pension providers were sharing, everyone who had a pension with them was sharing a year's worth of free link to Experian to do their own credit checks. So it was a case of, we believe this breach has happened. We don't know what the impact is because we know your information is lost. There is likelihood that your identity could have been stolen. So what we're going to do for you to mitigate this risk as much as possible is we're going to give you a year's worth of Experian financial checks so you can keep an eye on your credit record. Well, that's not actually that helpful. I mean, it is great to know that that's happening, but if you're the individual whose information has been lost, and if it's your pension, you're probably of a certain age, you're probably a little bit scared about what's happened there. But all of these things is around, how do you give the person whose information is lost or stolen or breached, how do you give them the tools to support themselves, to help themselves, to protect themselves against what might come next? And that's difficult because you can't anticipate what might come next. So it is tricky, isn't it, Aimee?
Yeah.
So I think you might have sort of started to touch on a few already, but what would you guys say are the biggest mistakes organisations make during the first few days after discovering a breach?
Panic.
Panic, yeah, and delaying tactics, not knowing what to do. And that might just be out of fear, could be out of lack of education and knowledge around what to do. I've been in organisations where people have caused a data breach and they've been too frightened to tell anyone about it. So they've kept their mouth shut and hoped it's gone away. There's a lot of that. Yeah, and then that leads to panic because it's too late then, because the hair's already racing. It's, time's gone by. So there's a lot of that happens. And a misconception, we said at the very beginning, the misconception between an IT incident, a security incident, or a data breach, or both, and establishing that. And again, that's around education and knowledge in the business, in the workplace, isn't it? And making sure everybody who works with personal data knows the difference. Just because you've lost your laptop doesn't mean you've lost your data.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, delay can be the real problem causer at the very beginning. If you're causing a delay at the beginning, then you're delaying the containment, you're delaying the investigation, you're delaying your risk assessment activities, and the risk might go up the longer it's delayed, which then causes you more problems. And if your staff have noticed something and they're not sure, instead of doing something about it, if they've not had the right training, they might just sit back and go, oh, well, it's not my problem, it's IT's problem, or oh, it's just an email, and that causes the delay, which just rolls down the massive stone down the hill, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It causes it escalates problems because it just starts to escalate and get away from you.
Yeah. And like we said as well earlier, it's not about your organization's reputational damage. I often do a lot of breach scenarios, like tabletop exercises with clients, and it's amazing how quickly they go to speak to their lawyers and their PR because they're concerned about their own reputational damage. That's not really a focus for us. We don't care about that. The ICO doesn't care about that. And if you're a European organisation, the supervisory authorities in Europe don't care about that either. They care about the individuals whose information it is. So that's quite important as well, to establish that and to get the right people around the table very quickly to have those conversations around who's taking control of what, and identifying those roles. When there's a big incident, you usually have an incident team come together and everyone is assigned a particular role to take care of, and you have regular meetings. Sometimes when there's a huge data breach, you're meeting every hour for an update. To understand, well, what's unfolding now, what do we know now, what's just changed, what still don't we know, who do we need to get involved now, do more people need to be around the table? And those conversations happen. So in some severe breaches, you're in the incident room for days trying to work that out.
When you describe it like that, it sounds like a large organisation with a team of 10 people doing these kind of things. It isn't necessarily the case. I think even if you're a small organisation, you still need to have people where even if it's a team of 2 or 3 of you, each having responsibilities that they can then address that breach. Because I think, especially from the external thing of the threat actors, when you look at the really big stuff, they are not necessarily just after the big guns. They're not after the big names. They're using their smaller suppliers to get in. And if you're a smaller supplier with a small organization, you are as at risk as that big name that you're working for. And so having those dedicated people that can get together should there be an incident and make those decisions and have that information gathered. You don't need to have a big organization, a big team to that. I think every organization, no matter what size, needs to have that kind of plan, the incident plan in place, so that they can really address it and get ahead of it as much as they can to mitigate.
I think small risks. I think small organisations. You made a really good point there, Aimee. I think small organisations are more at risk because they don't have the facilities and the resources behind them to support them when something goes wrong. You know, if you're some little Etsy shop and you've got everyone's details that you've sold to for the last 5 years, and suddenly your database is hacked and all that information is stolen, if you are a little one-man band, who are you turning to for support and help around that? You know, because you're not going to have data protection training, you're not going to have a data protection officer. It's just you. It's just you keeping your customers' records safe, you know, and what does that mean to you? And so, you know, even like Aimee says, you know, it is important. I deal with a lot of really big clients, and when something goes wrong, it goes catastrophically wrong. But there are little clients who are really struggling with, you know, there's only 7 of us who work here. Who's taking the lead on this? Who's taking responsibility for that? What do we need to do? Because they're not really sure. So having some sort of incident plan is really important, no matter how big you are, like Aimee says.
And then also if you've got that incident plan, then you can have things in place that protect you. So I think another challenge can be preserving the evidence. Something like a security incident happens, which has resulted in a personal data breach, and that small IT team might instantly rush to fix the problem, which then means that the evidence is compromised because they overwrite logs or they accidentally delete something that shows what happened because they're trying to change the system to fix the loophole that they've just discovered or whatever it is. And in that panic, again, they cause themselves more problems because they then delete the evidence. So if you've got an incident plan in place which outlines exactly what everybody needs to do and when they need to do it, IT team need to preserve the evidence before you try and fix the problem, get a copy of everything and then do your problem fix and things like that. Communicate better within your teams, make sure that everybody knows who to contact and keep that up to date. So if people move on or there's a change in role, then make sure that is up to date and that your incident team is the contact details are updated as well. And
I think, Aimee, you did a bit of research on some recent ICO enforcement around this.
Yeah, so there's been a few big ones. The Capita, which you mentioned before about the pensions, they were fined 14 million by the ICO because of the delay in response. So it was 2 days before they actually quarantined and locked down the device that had caused the leak, which enabled the threat actors to get further into the systems and increase the impact of the breach in that way. And then you've got the Interserve group, which was a few years back, which was 4.4 million fine because they ignored their own security system alerts that came up to tell them that a phishing email has successfully got into the system, and those alerts were ignored, which then obviously became very costly for the business themselves.
It does make you wonder what went through somebody's head to go, do you know what, we're just going to leave that. You know, accept, okay, return. I mean, who presses
mute that? I'm a bit busy.
Yeah, delete. But it happens, doesn't it? It happens even in massive organisations like Interserve Group. I mean, honestly, they have so much resource. Why would they just ignore that? But it happens. People make decisions that are mistakes, perhaps, hopefully just mistakes, and they've learned from that.
Yeah, it was also, I mean, working for an organisation in the past as big as Capita was, it's, that's such and such's job, get in touch with them. Oh, well, they're on annual leave. Oh, well, we'll wait until they come in. Well, 3 days has gone by and the device hasn't been sorted. You know, you need backups. You need if that person's not in or suddenly they've broken their leg and they've got to be off work, who else is going to take that over? And that needs to be updated. It's a organic process. It's not a set in black and white and it's finished and it's done and it's put into a file for another day. That process is organic and is constantly moving and changing and growing.
That could take us on to a whole other podcast about business continuity. So, you know, ultimately, why is your business continuity plan? Someone's off sick for a fortnight. Oh, well, we're just not going to bother with doing any IT then. What happens? Who picks that up? Who's responsible? Because this is the thing. One of the things under the legislation, it talks about accountability principles. It talks about who's in charge, who's taking responsibility. From the top down, it's so important. You can't just go, oh well, Joe's off sick this week, so we'll just park that breach and we'll worry about it next week. It doesn't happen like that. It can't happen, because so much more damage, especially with cyber attacks, it moves so fast. Once they're in, and you've lost control. You need someone on it immediately shutting things down. So it's an exciting, interesting, and very scary time all at once, I think.
So how are things like ransomware attacks, supplier incidents, and modern technology changing breach management?
Well, as Rachel's just said, in the cyber world, it's ever changing. I mean, it's not just ransomware, and I think that is another big misconception, is the only threat is from ransomware. It is not anymore. I mean, organisations are facing a huge increase in phishing attacks, social engineering, credential theft, business email compromises, attacks on your suppliers, as we've mentioned before. They'll use the back door to get into you, and they know that the third-party suppliers are that back door. And the Microsoft have put out reports basically to show how many things they're stopping, and they reported recently that their customers are facing more than 600 million cyber criminal and national state attacks every day. So if you think of organisations are literally under a barrage of attacks every day, and some of that can be stopped automatically, some of that is stopped with some of your software in place behind your emails and things like that, and Microsoft and Google as well have got those things in place, but some of it gets through. And when those things get through, when they get through that net, that's when you really need to have the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. So ransomware, unfortunately, is not the only threat.
How often do we get it, Amy, where, I got an email, it said it was from the chief exec and he needed me to do this today.
Yeah.
We fall for it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's all around training, isn't it? Making sure your people understand. But they're so clever, because they write these emails in a language in the way that you'd expect your boss to write those emails to you. Can you just do this for me today? Can you just quickly if you worked in credit control, can you just make this payment for me today? It's really important. Just send this information, send this amount of money to this. I'm out of the office today working remotely. Can you just do this for me? It's a rush. Happens. Yep. Even the most intelligent people who are really switched on can sometimes click that link.
Yeah.
And it's game over, isn't it? At that point, you can almost feel your life implode in front of you. But it happens a lot, and through places like LinkedIn, we know LinkedIn had a real problem with people registering that they're working at new organizations via LinkedIn, and then all of a sudden they're working out people's email addresses, because they know they now work at URM, so they can have a good guess at what the URM email address is, and then suddenly they're finding all sorts of things out. So it's scary, really.
Yeah, because they don't, the threat actors don't need to be program specialists and work out how to hack into your system through your programming anymore. It's not that matrix style need anymore, because it's been simplified by just simply social engineering somebody to hand over their credentials, a fake password reset. Gaining the telecommunications industry have been battling it for a number of years, where they need to get hold of is that OTAC code, that PIN number that's sent to your mobile. As soon as they've got that, they can get in. And that's the social engineering side, which is so much simpler for these hackers than trying to write program that can find that one digit that's out of place in your binary that can get you in.
And how many people even still use like their kids' names, their dogs' names, their date of birth and stuff like that for passwords? Oh my goodness. Get some password control. Make sure you're using good credentials. Don't just put your child's birthday and name there, or what your rabbit was called when you were a child, because that happens. People do that. Yeah. And you put everything, your whole life goes on social media. A lot of people, so on your social media, you've got all that stuff in there showing you that Flossie was your first rabbit. It's dead easy to guess your details then. Be careful about what you're doing. We've all moved forward in this digital age, but actually what we've done is gifted people all of our information.
Yeah, I mean, technology is definitely helping them as well. It might help us in our day-to-day lives. It's wonderful in some cases, but AI, all they need to do is give AI your Facebook profile, and AI will find that information for you. They don't need to sit there and scan it all. They don't need to go through it bit by bit to work it out. They can use AI against you to then socially engineer you and get into what they need to get into. And it's quite terrifying, really, as well.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And using other suppliers and sub-processors is another way in, and that happens a lot. Making sure that you've got really good data processing agreements in place with your suppliers is so important about who's taking accountability and responsibility when something goes wrong, because often it's easy to attack the little man at the end of the chain and work the way up than it is to come in from the top down, and find your way in from the bottom from someone who's probably got very little information security and very little data protection knowledge, if any at all, and then you're in. And that's it. It's like making sure you identify your different roles and responsibilities at the offset when you're setting up these contracts, and understand, right, your indemnities, whether you're indemnifying yourself against each other, who's taking responsibility. That's so important.
Businesses now, even the smaller businesses, are holding so much information, not just personal data, but just information as a whole. They're holding huge amounts. And you've not got big buildings with massive servers in, so you're using cloud providers, you're using SaaS platforms, you're using external HR systems, payroll systems, you're using AI, you're using Microsoft. You're relying on all of these third-party suppliers without really doing the right due diligence and making sure that, no matter the size of them, they have all of the right stuff in place that will protect the data that you need them to protect, basically, and make sure that all of those doors are well and truly shut, and they're like Fort Knox, and the people are trained properly, and all of that due diligence that you need to do. I mean, your biggest example, again, talking about ICO fines, is the NHS breach, where Advanced Computer Software Group were fined 3.07 million because of security measures and controls that they didn't have in place that enabled the attackers to get in to the NHS via them. And that was the first processor that was actually ever fined, and we've talked about it before, but it just shows that the responsibility doesn't fall on just you as an organisation. It falls on your processors as well, and everyone needs to do.
Like the Marks and Spencer's breach, isn't it? The Marks and Spencer's breach was the same, wasn't it? I mean, Marks and Spencer's reputation is in tatters. Who wants to shop online at Marks and Spencer's now after what's happened? But really, was it their fault? Where's their responsibility start and end over their supplier of the platform that was attacked? So it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult, but you have to identify these roles and responsibilities, define them, and take responsibility and accountability for where it sits with you, and make sure your contracts are good.
Yeah. Another one that's been in the news recently is OpenAI, talking about AI earlier, that one of their suppliers was attacked, and a load of information of OpenAI's was taken via that supplier. Obviously, it's not hit the ICO or anything like that at the moment, but it was in the news very recently about it, along with a few other things of OpenAI, and even when they're going against the AI systems themselves now as well, and their suppliers. So it really is something that people need to have on the radar. And another, at the same time, hybrid working and bring your own device arrangements, and as we've said, the cloud platforms and the software as a service platforms just increase that spread of systems and locations and suppliers, and it just grows and grows and grows exponentially, which puts you at more and more and more risk.
Yeah, definitely a higher risk now than we've ever had since COVID, really.
So what practical steps should organisations be taking now to prepare for a breach and demonstrate accountability afterwards?
Be ready before it happens.
I mean, we say it all the time, don't we, Aimee? You learn from a data breach. When something's gone horribly wrong, you learn from that and you take that forward, and hopefully that organisational learning prepares you for the next time, so there isn't a next time, effectively, or you handle it better next time. But it's kind of the cart before the horse. Often when we're talking to clients, the horse is already bolted, that door's well and truly open, and you're in trouble. How do you make people be proactive in advance? It's around learning, it's around getting the right information, it's around having the right things in place, doing your due diligence. The problem is privacy isn't sexy, it doesn't make money. And the flip side of that, so often clients aren't interested in it so much because it doesn't really have a value, you know, but it does when it's on the flip side of that coin and it goes wrong. It has a huge value. How do you get that across to people that actually, yes, it's going to cost you something right now and it's a bit of pain right now to go through preempting something happening and being prepared, but actually that's a drop in the ocean compared to what it's going to cost you after the event when you've not done anything about it and when you've actually pushed it aside and said that's not important, because the ICO is falling on you like a ton of bricks when you don't care about it. And when you've brushed it aside, when you've been warned and told to be ready, to be prepared, to do your due diligence, to get your house in order, and you ignore that professional advice and then it goes wrong, that's when you're in big trouble because you've ignored the advice of the expert. So how do you get people to be more proactive? How do you get them to do testing? How do you get them to audit themselves? What, you know, that's what we're asking them to do, isn't it, Aimee? We do this regularly with clients.
You start at your paperwork, you have an incident or breach response procedure that works for your business, that, you know, is right for your business, and you've got an incident response team on the ready, so when something happens you can start coordinating your response, but you do that in a proactive way that looks at, okay, this will save us money in the long run, rather than it doesn't make us money, and yes, it's costing us money, but it will save us money over the longer term. And you know, everyone's looking to save money at any place they can, especially in current climate, but getting those steps in place at the beginning can really help you to defend, should you need to defend if the ICO comes along or something does happen. And keep your ROPA up to date so you know where your data is. I mean, as we've just been saying, so many systems, so many suppliers, so many places that your data is, who's got what data and where is it, is all on your ROPA. You keep your ROPA up to date, then you are taking hours and hours and hours of research out of your investigation as to, oh, right, this is the person we need to go to for this, and this is the person we need to go to for that. And that was updated 2 months ago, so we know that person's in position.
Yeah, it's your roadmap, isn't it, Aimee? Ultimately, your ROPA is your roadmap of what's happening. It's the data journey. When you lose a system, if a system is compromised, you go straight to your ROPA. You go to all of the filters to where that use that system. All of those departments use that system. You can let them know immediately. This has been compromised. This has happened. We need to shut it down. We're telling these people, rather than nobody having a clue what's going on and who's this going. You know, shutting a system down and you're not sure what teams it's going to impact. What's the impact of that? You know, she's closing something down midday and everyone's currently working on it. It could have a huge impact. So yeah, the rope is a good call, actually, Aimee, you know, to make sure that people truly understand where information is and what the impact's going to be when they switch systems off, or they can tell people it's been compromised.
And your staff as well. I mean, the training. It's always critical, isn't it? It remains critical particularly for breaches, especially because so many of them originate from human error. If you don't just have that 4-page CBT every year that people have to sit there and click on, and actually do a genuine data protection and information security training that helps them relate it to their day-to-day job and their day-to-day roles, and also encourage them to report incidents and make them understand that it's free from blame, and that by reporting the incident they're helping the business, not being the problem, then you're getting ahead of the game.
Yeah, don't run away from it. It's never a finger pointing exercise, is it? And that's really important. We say that quite regularly. You know, help us to help you. Tell us what's happened. We can support you and get it right. If you don't tell us and you hide it and you lock it in a drawer and you pretend it didn't happen, you switch off your computer and go home, that's not helping anybody, because actually we can't support you. We can't contain it. We can't recall it. We can't do any of those things to try to mitigate the risk as much as possible, as early as possible. So I think training is the same all the time. Regular training, regular bulletins, you know, keeping people up to date with things that have happened, and tell them why it's important that you're training them on this, because actually they're probably just like, more data protection training, really? Tell them why. Tell them about these breaches. Tell them about the fines. Tell them about the people that are involved. Tell them it's a real situation. Show them it's a real scenario, that just because it's happening in the news doesn't mean it isn't going to happen to us. You know, did Marks and Spencer's think that this was going to happen to them? Did British Airways think that was going to happen to them? These huge organisations with all that security in place, all those millions of people working for them, still happened. So, you know, nobody's untouchable. So training your staff to be vigilant, aware, understand, you know, and get them involved in the process so they understand. I always find if you tell people why you're teaching them something, they take it on board more and they're more interested. So yeah, training your staff is really important. And making sure your policies and procedures are up to date. And we bang on about that regularly, don't we? Keeping your policies and procedures up to date, keeping everybody in the loop, everybody trained, make sure you're passing that accountability onto your staff. You're saying you're involved in this too. This is important for you.
Yeah.
You're responsible. And
then documenting your decisions, your actions, and anything that's happened, so that you've got that defensibility if the ICO does knock on your door. And then also, I said it earlier, is it's organic. You can learn from breaches when they happen. So obviously you want to try and have everything in place before it happens. But then, like business continuity as well, if when it does happen, you then go, oh, that didn't quite work and that could have been done better and we could improve here and we can improve there. Learning from every opportunity that comes up, whether it's a near miss or a big full-on breach. Learn from all of those steps will tighten yourself up and make sure that you improve controls and reduce future risk and strengthen your operational resilience against things in the future.
Yeah, every day's a school day, right? So organizational learning is so important. That's how you learn from those mistakes, like anything in life.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys, for another fantastic discussion. If any of our listeners would like to ask Rachael and Aimee a question for a future episode, you can either follow the link in the description or you can just pop it in the comments. So thank you so much again for your time today, guys. Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we will see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the InfoSec Insider podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. You can listen to the InfoSec Insider podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, Podbean, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.